My name is Ralph, and I've worked outside most of my life doing things like building, fixing, and gardening. When I was hired to record and take care of an old Appalachian cemetery, I didn't think twice. The work wasn't very demanding, but it paid poorly. All you had to do was clean up after the graves, take pictures of them, and write down background information. It seemed like it would be straightforward work. The place was high up in the hills, past the point where the road was more of a memory than a real surface. When I got there, the place looked normal and in awful shape. The stones were bending at odd angles, moss was growing on the names, and the gate was rusting away. It was sad, like everyone had forgotten about it. On the first day, I started taking pictures of stones lined up in neat rows. Lydia Hammond was born in 1823 and died in 1891. That one I remember very well. I carefully marked the drawing and even put a small blue flag next to it, even though it was difficult to see. That night I went back to my house, uploaded the picture, and wrote down the name in a notebook. Nothing strange. Still, the next morning when I went back to the same row, the stone wasn't Lydia Hammond's. The plaque still had cracks, a tilt, and moss patterns, but the name had changed. It now said, Thomas K. Reeves, 1823-1891. It's been the same for years, but someone very different. I didn't move but looked back and forth between the gravestone and my phone photos. The shot still featured Lucy Hammond, but Reeves was carved into the stone in front of me. I rubbed my eyes because I thought I was too worn out to see, but what I saw was real. It went on for a few more days. It would be one name when I took the shot, but by morning it would be a different one. Occasionally, the only thing that was different was a middle initial or a single number in the year. Occasionally, the stone had changed who it was, making it look like it had always belonged to someone else. Besides that, my notebook didn't help. The pages I had carefully written by hand began to change on their own. When I looked back at yesterday's notes, I saw words I hadn't written. The writing appeared hurried and rough. What about this event? Was it the most upsetting? It looked like something I'd written. I was getting nervous by the fourth day. I used chalk to mark the stones because I thought the moss might be getting in the way. But when I got back, the chalk was still there, but it was now writing names on graves that weren't where I had meant them to be. I lined up 3 flags on one grave. Every time I went back, it had a new name. After that came the books. In the old caretaker's shed, I found spiral notebooks that were dirty and covered in spider webs. At first, they were dull. They had names of graves, weather notes, and logs for maintenance. But as it went on, the writing became strange. It said in one, "Leave if it has your name on it. Don't stay after dark." It only said, "On another page." They change what they write. I couldn't sleep that night. The wind was shaking the walls of my shack, and I kept picturing feet outside. By morning, I was sure I was being over the top. I chose to finish my work quickly and leave. But as I walked back to the graveyard, something new stopped me. That gravestone was new to me. It was next to the fence on the west. It looked like the ground around it had just been moved or had been there all night. It was light and smooth, and there were no cracks or moss on the surface. I got down on my knees and cleaned the dirt off its face while my heart was racing. The name was carved very deeply into the rock. Ralph White. This is my name. It was the right year of birth. It wasn't written what year the person died. I tripped and almost dropped my camera. When my notebook slipped out from under my arm, it fell open on the ground. Yesterday I wrote other people's names on this page. Today it was empty except for a new line I wrote. Grave ready, waiting for someone to move in. I didn't go back after that. I forgot to bring my camera, the tools, and the notes. It's possible that the stone is no longer there, but occasionally when I close my eyes, I see it there, ready for me to return. In the Appalachian Hills, I worked as a groundskeeper for a graveyard a few years ago. My name is Ethan. Doyle was the young man who hired me. He didn't talk much unless he had to. For my first day, he showed me how to mow the grass, brush the stones, and put the tools away by walking me around the grounds. Everything seemed simple until we got to the very north side. That is where I observed it. A rusted wire fence, only waist-high, gradually merging into the scrub. Beyond it, the land receded into a cluster of uneven stones partially concealed by trees. Doyle put down his rake and tapped the fence. Then he said in a flat, cold voice, "We don't go past that. Do not cut, trim, or clear. You should leave that person alone if you see them." He spoke before I could answer. It was like there was no other way to do it than to keep going. But I remembered his tone. The idea wasn't a suggestion. It was the law. I did what I was told for weeks. I stayed on the well-kept grounds where the rows were neat, the stones were smooth, and on the weekends people left flowers. However, each time I approached that fence line, I experienced a compelling urge to visit it. It looked like something was wrong with the land beyond. The grass was quite dark, almost gray. The ground was sloping in an odd way. From a distance, I could only catch a glimpse of the gravestones, which appeared to be bending toward each other due to their bent shapes. At first, I told myself it was because of soil loss or something else, but the more I looked, it seemed like it was planned. The stones were turning in patterns instead of just dropping. I stayed behind one night after Doyle left work. The sun was down low, making the shadows long. My heart was beating faster than it should have as I walked up to the fence. It was easy to see up close. 8 gravestones arranged in a rough circle. There was a flat piece of rock in the middle of each one which made them tilt inward. It looked like a table. I told myself I was only going to look. One look and I'll be gone. I could just step over the fence because it was so low. I did. Inside, the ground was too soft, like stepping on wet grass. It hadn't rained in weeks, but my boots sank with a dull squish. There was more weight in the air, like it was pressing down on my shoulders. I got down on my knees next to a rock and brushed the grass off of it. There was no name, just rough marks that looked like symbols. Words I didn't know, more like runes, carved so deeply that time should have erased them. I stood there feeling uncomfortable. That's when I saw it. The stones had moved. They were getting closer and leaning harder toward the middle slab. But I hadn't seen them move before. I felt like something snapped inside me. I crossed the fence again and told myself it was all in my head. The light might have been lying. I may have been getting tired. But as I went about my business the next morning, I caught myself looking back at the fence. They moved again, this time getting closer, tighter, and more purposeful. Then I saw him. There was a man in the middle of the circle. He was lying on his back with his hands folded in front of him and his head down. I called out because I thought Doyle might have been lying, and that part was being taken care of by someone else. The man didn't move, though. Didn't move. He didn't even release a breath. He did nothing but look at the slab. He was gone when I blinked. I stopped going near the fence after that. However, I couldn't help but look. The circle got smaller every day. The stones leaned more every day. Thereafter, I saw something one afternoon that really upset me. One of the stones had a name cut into it. It was faint and unfinished, but it was clear. Ethan Collins, my name is. There were no letters there the day before. They didn't get deeper, so I didn't wait. That's where I left my tools. Then I got in my truck and drove until the graveyard was miles away. But sometimes in the middle of the night I can still feel it. That closed circle of silence ready for me to enter again. Hi, my name is Claire. A few summers ago, I got a casual job cutting grass and pulling weeds out of a remote Appalachian graveyard. I needed gas money as a college student, and the ad in the paper made it sound straightforward. Maintain grounds. Hours are flexible. You don't need skills. It was a small spot on a dirt road that GPS didn't really show up on. There was an old white church at the edge of the lot. In the graveyard there were about 60 stones. Some of them were so old that the names had worn off. There was only the sound of the mower and the cicadas in the trees while I worked. Things went well for the first few days. I pulled weeds, clipped the grass, and swept the graves clean of trash. I did notice something strange during my second week, though. A tall, thin headstone that I thought was near the door was now in the back row. I thought I had forgotten something. With so many stones that looked the same, it was simple to get them mixed up. The stone, on the other hand, stood out. It was pale gray basalt with a sharp crack running through the top. Ellen Marsh, 1831-1892, was carved into it in a tiny way. It was in my notes from the first day. I also recall that when I began mowing, I brushed a spiderweb away from it. It was now 30 yards away. I didn't think much of it. I might have been worn out. Maybe I didn't remember well. But after a week, I found the stone in a different spot. This time it was in the middle row, facing the church at an angle. I looked at my phone that night. I had pictures that I had taken while I was taking a break. It was clear that the stone stood by the gate in one shot. In another picture, it was located in the back row. It got closer to the church every week. By the third week, I was scared enough to tell Mr. Bailey, the old man who did the payments, about it. "Don't worry about that one," he said with a shake of the head. "Keep cutting the grass." I knew not to ask again because of the way he spoke. I didn't say anything, but I did start to watch. The stone had moved a few feet each time I came back. It was easy to see the crack in the rock, and the name was just as weak. Ellen Marsh was slowly making her way across the graveyard, one row at a time. The courtyard was scorching the week before I left. I tried to beat the sun by starting to mow early. I stopped right there when I got to the far end. The moving stone wasn't just near the church. It was now right in front of the double doors, bowed forward as if it were praying. As I moved closer, the sweat in my eyes hurt. I saw the earth at that point. Fresh dirt that was darker than the green lay all over the ground in front of the church. There were not one but 3 new graves lined up along the road I had cut the day before. Not any flowers. Not a mark. Just turned the ground. Even though every nerve in my body told me to leave, I walked closer. I almost fell over when my boot sank into the soft ground. The ground around the middle hole had a rough wooden stick driven into it. A worn-out paper tag hung from the top. The heat had made it curl. As I bent down to read it, my hand shook. A single name, Claire Henderson, was written in worn-out black ink. Claire Henderson. My name is. The mower's handle fell off, and I ran through the bushes like it was nothing. I didn't stop to catch my breath until I got back to my car. I never got paid for the last time. But sometimes, I'm interested in how many graves there are now. How many rows has Ellen Marsh traversed? I'm also curious if the next tag, which is currently in place, bears the date for tomorrow. It was a few years ago that I worked on a trail crew in the Appalachian Hills. My name is Josh. We mostly cut down trees and fixed fences as part of our job. But one weekend, the county asked us to help clean up a graveyard. It wasn't massive, maybe 50 stones spread out on a hillside, but it was overrun with thorns that were higher than my chest. I was sent out with Marlin, an older guy who had lived in the area all his life. He moved slowly, but he knew the whole area very well. He stopped and looked me straight in the eye as we walked up the dirt path to the graveyard gate. "First rule," he said, his voice as rough as the road, "don't shut this gate at night if you come here." I thought he was kidding when I laughed. His face didn't change, though. The look in his eyes said it all. I asked why. He grumbled, "Just don't," and pushed the gate open. It's better not to trap anything. It made my skin crawl the way he said it. The day went by without any problems. We cut down weeds, stacked twigs, and raked leaves off the walks. When it got dark, Marlon told me he was going home and asked me to lock the shed. He told me, "Leave the gate the way you found it." Thereafter, he slowly walked off down the road. I cleaned up the last of the brush for another hour. By the time I finished, the sky was a bruised purple color, and crickets were screaming. As I pushed the tools to the shed, I caught a glimpse of the gate. It was open all the way. I was unsure. I've always had a problem with open gates. Wherever I was raised, you would close doors behind you, such as barn doors, yard gates, and similar barriers. Leaving it open felt wrong, as if there were tasks to complete. Because of this, I quickly closed it. The latch clicked into place and the springs groaned. There was a sound that rang through the graveyard like a lock turning. The air stopped moving. I first thought it was all in my head. Something was different when I turned around to look at the rows of stones again. There were more of them. The rows I hadn't cleared yet looked like they were full of new marks that were all the same shape and length. I rubbed my eyes and blinked hard. The number kept going up, though. Lines and lines of stones moving into the woods further into the darkness. It was then the voices came. Small talk rose like wind through dry grass. The tone was urgent, begging, and enraged, but I couldn't make out the words. They pressed up against me in a circle like a crowd around a fight. My heart was racing as I stumbled toward the gate. The latch wouldn't move when I got there, though. Even though my sweaty fingers slipped on the iron, the gate stayed in place. The whispers behind me turned into a chant, and I felt the ground shift. Soft mounds rose at my feet, marking the spot where I had just walked. As I slammed my shoulder into the gate and kicked the latch, fear shot through me. "Open!" I yelled. My voice broke in the dark. There were no more whispers. The cemetery was dead quiet for a moment. Then behind me, a single voice hissed loud and clear, "Remain." I turned around and saw nothing but rows and rows of stones that went deeper than the land should have allowed. The latch broke with one last push, and the gate opened wide. I fell through and hit my knees on the rocks. The air outside was clean and cool, and when I turned around, the extra stones had vanished. The same 50 graves I saw the morning before. I did not tell Marlon what took place. He just gave me a knowing look and said, "The gate was closed, wasn't it?" The next time I saw him, I did not reply. You should leave the gate alone if you ever find yourself in an Appalachian graveyard at night. That's all I know. There are doors that shouldn't close. It was 2 summers ago that a small history group in West Virginia hired me. My name is Joanna. My task seemed quite easy. Go to a list of lost Appalachian graves, take pictures of the headstones, and type up the writing on them for their digital records. Being able to spend several months exploring historic cemeteries did not intimidate me, as I have always maintained a keen interest in local history. Not at first, anyway. The first graveyard was on a ridge road, the kind where GPS doesn't work and trees grow close together like a cave. I parked and walked up a dirt path where I found about 20 stones spread out. Most of them couldn't be read, but some were surprisingly well kept. Caleb Turner, 1852-1901, caught my eye. It looked like time had saved the carving because it was clean. As soon as I put the name into my notes, I went on. After a few days, I went to a different graveyard 15 miles away. My stomach hurt as I wrote down the stones. It was tucked away in the back row and had the same pale stone style and name. Caleb Turner, 1852-1901. I thought there might be a chance. No one really changes their name, though. But the same years of birth and death? That didn't make sense. When I found Caleb Turner again in the third cemetery, same stone, same dates, I knew it wasn't a mistake. Furthermore, it wasn't just Caleb. Elizabeth Warren, 1878-1920, kept showing up over and over again. James Rowe, 1833-1870. There were exact copies of the stones every time the names showed up, as if someone had cut and pasted them all over the landscape. I couldn't stop looking at my pictures. They agreed with what I saw. The same stones keep showing up in different places and against different backgrounds. The history group didn't care about it when I brought it up with them. Most likely just common names, they said. Check that your notes are correct. Their tone made it sound like I was wrong. I stayed quiet, but I felt uneasy. On each trip, I found more copies. Sometimes whole rows of stones would match up. 6 stones in one graveyard would match up with 6 stones in another. It looked like the dead were passing on their genes. As usual, I stayed longer one night to try to finish before it got stormy. The ozone made the air thick and heavy. It died on my camera, but I kept writing names by flashlight. I saw something worse than repetition at that point. It wasn't just repeating what the stones did. They were making changes. I took a picture of a headstone that I thought couldn't be read the week before, but all of a sudden, the letters were clear as if it had been cut yesterday. I froze when I leaned in close to wipe off the rain. The name wasn't Elizabeth or Caleb, it was mine. Joanna Price, the birth year is correct. The new year of death is 2023. Today is the date. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled back and almost dropped the flashlight. Its beam moved across the smooth stone, and that's when I saw it. Not just letters, my own thoughts. The stone's smooth surface shone like a mirror, but what I saw in it wasn't just my image. There was something else on top of it. I saw my face, but my eyes were empty. I made a grin that was too big and too sharp with my mouth. The mirror moved, but I stayed still. I ran, tripped over roots, and half slid down the hill to my car. I didn't bring my bag or notes with me. I drove until the storm behind me was difficult to see. I have no idea how many copies are out there at this point. It's possible that they're in every graveyard and are spreading like a cancer. I really want to check, but I can't, because if there are more stones with my name on them, eventually one of the stones will no longer remain idle. One of them will already be full. Hey, my name is Bram, and I did work for a county record project on the side last year. They asked someone to go on a hike into the remote hollows of the Appalachians and make a list of old graves that were never included on government maps. I thought it would be easy and cost-effective to just hike in, take pictures, write down what I saw, and walk out. At the first few spots, there were worn-down stones, overgrown plots, and names that were becoming obscured by grass. However, by the third week, a significant shift occurred. I followed a narrow deer path into a hill valley one foggy morning. When I got to the graveyard, it just looked like any other place, maybe 40 stones arranged in crooked rows. When I started taking pictures, I made sure to get wide shots to save. That night, when I got back to my house, I put the pictures online. My stomach turned over. At the edge of one picture, a tiny shape emerged. A tall figure that was fuzzy from the fog, but clear enough that I knew it wasn't a trick of the light. All day I hadn't seen anyone out there. I told myself it was just a shadow. A tree stump might do. The next set of pictures, though, showed something worse. The number of graves didn't add up. There were 40 stones in the morning shots. By afternoon, 50. By evening, it was 37. The rows moved, grew, and shrunk. It looked like the cemetery could breathe. After a week, I was determined to show that I was wrong. As I kept track of the stones, the air got thick and heavy like I was underwater. It was too quiet when my camera clicked. This time it's 42 stones. I wrote the number down and hit it twice with a highlighter. But when I looked at the pictures that night, the count was wrong again. Some stones were gone. Others showed up where there had been nothing on the ground. Even worse, there were thin, pale, smoke-like forms in the background of several shots. They stood between the rows, always looking out. I was scared enough at this point to call my boss. I told her about the mistakes in the pictures that didn't match up. She let out a sigh and said, "Old cemeteries are difficult to understand. Light, angles, and memories can be tricky. Just keep writing down." I did that. For 3 more weeks, I walked into that hollow, took pictures, and each time I emerged, my feelings intensified. The graveyard was always different. On some days, it seemed to go on forever, reaching up into the trees. On other days, it got smaller, with stones pressed together and names scratched over like erasers. The trail had changed since the last time I went. It was tighter to get in, and the air was heavy. Even the birds were quiet in the woods, which blocked out noise. When I broke into the open, the cemetery was much bigger than it had been before. There were hundreds of stones stacked on top of each other like troops. My hands were shaking as I raised my camera. I saw them through the lens, pale, nameless forms standing between the graves. Even though they weren't moving, each shot showed them getting closer, slowly moving toward me. The air was pushing against my chest. I heard a sound behind me and turned around, but the road was gone. There was no path, no way in. Only trees. Fear spread. I put the camera in my bag and looked for a way out as I stumbled through the graves. It looked like the rows would never end, going around and around the same center stone. My lungs were gasping and my throat hurt. That's when I heard it. There was a low, close voice that called my name. Bram. The sound wrapped around me and felt like someone was leaning right next to my ear. I ran quickly through the bushes and tripped over roots until, amazingly, I found the path again. I ran all the way to my truck and didn't stop. The next morning, I resigned from my job for the county. They're still on my hard drive, but I'm not going to look at them, because if the graves keep growing and the people keep getting closer, one day, one of those voices won't just whisper my name, it will call me home. My name is Ben, and I worked as a groundskeeper in the Appalachians for almost 10 years. Most graves were small and quiet, and they didn't ask me to do much. All they asked was that I cut the grass, trim the trees, and fix up fences. That was not the case at Sutton's Hollow. It was tucked away at the bottom of a narrow valley. On either side, rocks rose up like dark walls. The cemetery was old, and many of the stones didn't have names on them. People in the area told me not to go there, but I thought that rumors of curses and ghosts were just mountain myths. Late October was the first time I saw the lights. The air was damp and smelled like houses higher up the hill were burning wood. I stayed past dusk to finish fixing up the tool shed. As I was packing up, I saw dim glows past the far fence line. They looked like small balls of pale light floating just above the ground. I thought they were fireflies at first, but it was too cold for that time of year. These lights also didn't flash. The flames were steady and blue-white. They moved slowly through the dark. I stood still and watched as more came in. The number kept going up until there were 100 of them, moving in and out of the trees like watchmen at their places. The air got thick and quiet. There were no more bugs at all. That was what I told myself. It had to be lights from kids or hunters going by. I quickly grabbed my toolbox and ran to the gate. That's when I heard someone walk behind me. Take your time, thoughtful. Stepping on the dirt path I had just made. Hello? I called, but my voice was weak. There were no more steps. My heart was racing as I turned. There was nothing there but a few rows of crooked stones in the dim light. The toolbox in my hand started to rattle as I walked faster. The steps started up again. This time they were closer. I saw him when I got to the gate. At the very end of the graveyard there was a person standing. He wore his hood down low, his shoulders wide and his hands at his sides. He wasn't moving. Not called out. I think he just stared. It was too far away and the hat made it hard to see his face. My chest got tight. I held up my flashlight, but he picked up something before the beam reached him. Steele saw the light. A knife. I dropped the box of tools. The sharp sound echoed off the stones. The figure didn't move. His steps were slow and steady as he walked toward me, dragging the knife along one of the gravestones. It sounded like teeth on glass when the metal hit something. The blobs of light pulsed brighter and got closer to the graveyard. The blobs of light made me feel as if they were squeezing me inside the graveyard with him. Fear spread. I messed around with the gate's latch while my hands were wet. The footsteps got stronger. They were slow and precise, like he knew I wouldn't be able to escape. Finally, the gate gave way and swung wide with a scream. I ran down the dirt path so fast that my lungs hurt and my heart hit my ribs hard. Behind me, steel scraped against stone, and I thought I heard a low laugh chasing me into the trees. I ran all the way to my truck and didn't stop. My tires sprayed grit as I slammed the door shut and sped down the gorge road. I didn't get the tools again. It rusts in the grass some nights, and I wonder if it's still there, or if the man in the hood took it and was waiting for me to come back. I can still see those lights when I close my eyes. They're around, shining and waiting. It's like they're marking the spot where I'll be buried when I die. My name is Rachel, and I've always been interested in places that no one else has been. Anywhere that looked like the rest of the world had left it behind. Like old mines, houses that had fallen down, and buildings that were in terrible shape. That sense of adventure is what took me into the back hollows of Appalachia one spring. Following a path that was difficult to see through the bushes, I had heard that out there was a burial circle. A graveyard that was different from all the others. People in the area didn't talk much about it. Few people who did would just shrug and say, "Stones move where they shouldn't." Before I saw it for myself, I thought it was just tradition. It looked like the trees had pushed back in a perfect ring, making the space appear out of nowhere. In the middle stood a tall, jagged headstone that was higher than me. It looked like ages of rain had scratched it up. Dozens of smaller graves were spread out around it in loose rings. There were no neat groups of stones like in most graves, which I thought was strange. They went out in a spiral, curling around the center point like they were circling it. There were at least 3 rings left when the brush ate them all up. I thought it was beautiful at first, spooky but classy. I started to walk around the outside, taking pictures and writing down names where I could still read them. But something kept bothering me as I went around. The names changed all the time. I had written Elias Moore, 1844-1887 on one stone, but now it says Elijah Moore, 1846-1889. The letters were no longer worn or faded. They had changed, as if they had been cut into the rock from scratch while I wasn't looking. My head shook, sure that I had copied something wrong, but it kept taking place. The stones moved every time I turned my back on them. Names were changed, Dates were changed, and whole texts disappeared into blank spaces. My stomach lurched when I took a step back to take a wide picture. The rings were no longer in the same spot. They got tighter as they got closer to the middle stone. I walked faster to try to find my way back, but the ground let me down. The paths I thought I had taken are no longer there. The graves had moved around, making the space around me smaller. I quickly checked what I saw on my phone, but the pictures didn't match. There were 4 rings of stones in one picture, only 2 in the next. In another, there were none at all, just the tall center sign. The air got thicker and pressed against my chest. There was no sound at all. It looked like everything was frozen, even the leaves. Then I felt it. Dozens of eyes watching me from the stone's blank faces. Moving toward the middle, I hoped that would help me find a way out. Even though it was dry outside, my boots sank into the soft ground. The smaller graves were pushed closer together, making it hard for me to see what was written on them. Some had my family name on them. Some wrote down the year I was born. I stopped at the base of the big stone in the middle. That one's surface was smoother than the others, like it had been sealed. My skewed and pale image looked back at me. Then, just below the reflection, new words showed up, letters carving themselves into the surface in rough strokes that I could almost hear. Not yet. My throat shut up. I walked backwards, falling over the smaller graves and pulling at vines until I broke through the trees and found the path again. I turned around and left. I still don't know what that message meant. Not yet, for me. Was it intended for my demise? Is it time for my reappearance? I only know that the stones weren't done with me yet. They were ready. What a strange job I had last summer, taking care of the grounds for an old mountain graveyard on the edge of Appalachia. My name is James. Although the compensation was modest, the tranquility and serenity provided me with happiness at that time. There were no snarky co-workers or nonstop talk. It was just me, my lawnmower, and the sound of the dead. The stone angel was a symbol in that graveyard that everyone in town always talked about. It was taller than any of the marks around it, and was said to have been carved by a traveling artist in the late 1800s. Its wings were wide but chipped, and its face was worn smooth until it looked like an empty oval. People called it the Faceless Angel. It didn't bother me much. On my first day on the job, I put my water jug next to the angel and leaned my rake against the base. Then I cleared the rows. When I returned after half an hour, the rake had disappeared. I finally found it 10 graves down, resting against a stone. Even though I knew I hadn't lost it, I told myself I had. The following week, the same thing took place. This time it was my scissors, which I had placed carefully on the base of the angel. I later found them sitting on top of the gravestone of a child who had died in 1887. It was scary, but I laughed it off. I thought, tool slide. I might have been careless. Then I saw the old man. The sun was low in the sky and I could hear the sound of my mower everywhere. Someone slowly walking between the rows caught my attention. It was a hunched figure in worn overalls. His limp was clear and his hands were hanging at his sides like weights. "Afternoon, sir," I called out as I cut the grass. He didn't even look at me or recognize that I was there. With slow, heavy steps, they kept going toward the far end of the graveyard. I went after. I couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me about him. The moment I turned a bend around a crooked stone, he was gone. There was no sound of dirt or brush moving. There are only empty rows and quiet. I looked everywhere. He was gone. That night I tried to convince myself that it was just an optical illusion. There wasn't a car in the lot, but I thought I saw a guest leave. It could have been my nerves. but something inside me told me not to leave the graveyard. The graveyard felt wrong after that. The roads were no longer straight. It felt like the rows were always getting longer, like they didn't want me to get to the end. I thought I saw the same group of stones twice, like the ground had turned around and back on itself and the angel was having a change. It seemed that way. It felt like its head was turned toward me every time I walked by it. It looked like faces were pushing through from the inside of the empty circle, making it look larger. The last blow occurred one unforgettable morning. So I didn't bring my water jug with me. I left it at home, full and on the table. I would rather not take a chance on finding it again somewhere it shouldn't be. But by noon, it was there. It was well balanced on the grave of the little girl with the lamb, which was the same grave where I had previously found my clippers. The hole on the side of my jug was easy to spot, and the cap was tightened just the way I left it that morning. I left it at home. I went cold. It felt like someone was putting their hand on my chest. The angel stood out in the corner of my eye. For the first time since I started, I set down my tools. Not even locked the gate. I just left. When I returned a few days later to retrieve my mower, the jug was missing. Even so, the angel's face was blank. It looked less blank, I swear. My name is Liam, and I still don't understand why Vernon hired me. He was an older man from town. His face was as worn down as the hills. He was quiet and lithe. Most people didn't ask him what he did for a living because they respected him. I didn't think about it before I said yes when he asked me outside the feed shop with a piece of paper and some scissors. He said, "Brush Creek Hill. Needs to be cleared. Don't lose track." The last part sounded strange, but Vernon wasn't the type to explain. A mile-long walk up through blackberry and laurel bushes. The air was heavy and damp. When I got to the top, I was raw from being scratched and drenched in sweat. The graveyard was in a clearing, with 4 iron posts marking its corners. There was no gate or fence, just stones spread out on the hill. I made a list. There were 12 of them, and some were broken and almost sucked into the ground. I cut down some brush and stacked some twigs to try to make things look better. It was too quiet. There was no wind or birds. I could only hear the sound of my cutters and my own breaths. I looked up and froze when I stopped to get a drink. 15. I did the math again. Now 15 stones, not 12. There were 3 new ones standing in a row near the middle. They had faint names carved into their faces. I double-checked my notes to make sure I hadn't made a mistake. But there they were. I told myself that I must have missed them because bushes had hidden them before. But as I worked, I started to feel uneasy. The numbers seemed to change every time I looked up. 17, then 21, then 27. There were stones where there weren't any a minute ago. The rows were also moving. At first, the marks were spread out, but over time they slowly lined up in a straight line with all of them facing the center. Along with my work, the rows got tighter. As I counted, I began to whisper the numbers out loud to help me stay grounded. 31, 33, 37. My voice was shaking. The stones weren't just getting bigger, they looked around. I could feel it, someone's attention on me. Every time I blink, the smooth, unmarked ones that were blank seemed to move closer. There was more weight in my hands, and my throat was dry. I finally put down the clippers and yelled, "Enough!" The sound rang through the silence and was quickly absorbed by the air. That's when I saw it. The last row was forming right in front of me. It was sharp and purposeful, and every stone was the same. 12 of them, lined up like troops waiting to be checked out. The middle one had my name on it. I fell back, my heart pounding. As they went down the hill, the rows seemed to go on forever, folding into each other like mirrors reflecting mirrors. Each stone leaned just a little toward me. That's all I did. I ran. I didn't stop, even though branches tore at my arms and briars caught my clothes. I sped downhill until I tripped over some gravel and almost fell into my truck. When I turned around, the hill was once more made up of thick, single trees. Don't throw stones. No cleaning up. The next morning, I didn't go to Vernon. He didn't give him back his tools or money, but after a week I saw him cutting wood as usual while walking by the feed shop. He was sitting on his box. He looked up, gave one quick nod, and then asked just one question. 80? I did not reply. I just walked on. I know they'll answer if I say the number out loud. Thanks for coming along with me tonight as we talked about these scary stories about old graves and the secrets they might be keeping. Please keep in mind that these are only stories. Or are they warnings? Sometimes the line between myth and reality is thinner than we think. Would love to hear from you. Have you ever been to a graveyard that seemed odd, frightening, or even haunted? Tell us about the scariest thing that happened to you in the comments. If you like these stories, please subscribe and turn on alerts so you don't miss another scary night. There are more shades, whispers, and secrets to come. Please keep in mind that not all graves are empty.